Hello, my most amazing artists. Today, I am going to be sharing with you our Artist of the Month, Faith Ringgold. You might remember last month our artist was Yayoi Kusama, and we talked about her art, and we read a story, and we did some art projects based around being inspired actually by her art. This month, we are going to be talking about Faith Ringgold. So I am going to share with you some of her artworks and a little bit about her, as well as read you a little bit of a story from the book We Are Artists. Faith Ringgold is a painter, writer, mixed media sculptor, and performance artist. She said, "I have always known that the way to get what you want is don't settle for less. I always knew I wanted to be an artist." Faith was born in Harlem, New York in 1930. She is best known for her narrative quilts. She wrote the children's book Tar Beach in 1993, as well as many others, and her first job after college was teaching art. Now I'm going to read to you a little passage from the book We Are Artists, and it is called Stitching History. They called it Tar Beach. It wasn't like any other beach you might imagine. It was a hard and black rooftop that gave off that warm and tacky smell of hot asphalt. Beyond was a noisy sea of skyscrapers, bridges, and apartment blocks, with waves of taxis and cars stop-starting at traffic lights far below. To Faith, that rooftop in Harlem, New York, was as magical as any beach in the world might be. It was a place for dreaming. Faith and the other children would lie on the mattress on warm summer nights and gaze across the glittering city to the lights of the George Washington Bridge, while their parents sat around the old green table playing cards. Up there, they felt invincible, like anything was possible. They would dream of flying, touching the stars that seemed to rain down around them. They could fly over any obstacle placed in their path. In the 1930s, America was gripped by the Great Depression, so there wasn't much food to go around. Times weren't easy, but there was always something going on at Faith's house. Her mom, Willie Posey, was a fashion designer, and Faith's dad, Andrew, was always telling stories. People came and went constantly, chatting over tea and scraps of fabric. Faith was curious and artistic and determined to make her mark. She couldn't go to school that much because of her asthma, so she stayed at home with her mom and was always coloring or painting something. But she knew, even when she was little, that she wanted to go to college. She was fascinated by the boys who streamed up the steps from the local subway station. One day she followed them. They were all going to City College. "I want to go there one day," she told her mom, "and study art." "Then you shall," Willie replied. City College, Faith soon discovered, was just for boys, but she could always find a way around a challenge. After much persuasion, the principal eventually agreed that she could attend as the only girl in the college and study to be an art teacher. As Faith said, she was allowed to do art, but not to be an artist. Faith did become an artist, of course, but it didn't matter how good an artist she was. She was both African American and a woman. For centuries, African American people had not had the same rights as white Americans. The civil rights movement had helped change this, and African American people were starting to be treated more fairly. But the art world was still dominated by white male artists. Faith heard that it was going to be a big art show at the famous Whitney Museum of American Art, but not a single African American artist was to be included. She was furious. She came up with a plan. Faith and her friends would go to the opening, carrying whistles in their pockets, and blow them whenever the gallery staff weren't looking. They spread out, and soon the gallery was deafened with the sound of whistles. Oh, it made the curators mad. They couldn't work out who was making the noise. The protests worked. Well, in part. Some African American artists were invited in to meet the curators, but only the men. The women were left outside. Clearly, it would take longer for women artists to be seen. Faith's art was powerful and in-your-face kind of art, but no one was interested in buying challenging art in those days. What is it, she kept asking, that makes women's art different from men's? Then one day she realized that she had always been surrounded by forms of women's art. Quilting and needlework had been a huge part of the lives of the women in her family, right back to her great grandmother, who as a slave had created quilts to keep her own family warm. Knowledge and tradition had been passed down from mother to daughter, and now it was her turn. With her mother's help, Faith created her first art quilt. After that, she made more and more. Quilting, Faith realized, was a link to the women of her past and a way to create a new form of art. It was also a way to create paintings as large as she wanted and still be able to show them in galleries all over America. All she had to do was roll them up. She could take a whole exhibition in a single trunk. And you know what? Those people who hadn't looked twice at her first painting began to take notice. Somehow, the language of the quilt made it acceptable to be political. 50 years after the whistleblowing protest, the Whitney Museum finally bought one of Faith's prints for their collection. Other great galleries and museums have her quilts too. Her artworks hang in the homes of presidents, and her mosaics line the walls of subway stations in New York. Faith had always wanted to change things. Not only has she created a new language in art, but she has written many children's books and started a foundation called Anyone Can Fly, which is devoted to teaching children and adults about African American masters of art. Her organization, called Where We At, encouraged other Black women to find their own artistic voice, too. She said, "You can't sit around waiting for somebody else to say who you are. You need to write it and paint it and do it. That's where the art comes from. It's a visual image of who you are. That's the power of being an artist." I love that story about Faith Ringgold, and I hope you did too. Now we're going to take a minute to look at some of her artworks. Here you can see are two of her quilts. You can see how she's used some shapes in her quilts, and also it looks like there are some trees in this one here. Here is one of her story quilts. And you can see that the outside, all of her quilts usually have a border around the outside. And then in the inside, there is an image that usually tells a story. Here is another one of her story quilts. Again, the image is in the inside, and around the outside, the border this time has a pattern of different shapes. Here are some of her soft sculptures. Remember in the beginning, we said that Faith Ringgold made mixed media sculptures. These are some of them. Here is her quilt Tar Beach, which we talked about in the beginning when I started to tell you the story. You can see the story is in the inside of the quilt, and along the outside, she has little squares, each having little different designs and flowers in them and different patterns all around. Here are two more of her quilts with that same design. You have a story on the inside, and around the outside border, there are different designs. I hope you enjoyed learning about our Artist of the Month, Faith Ringgold. What you're going to do this week is I want you to share through a drawing. I want you to share something that you do with your family and then draw a picture of it. For example, we learned that Faith Ringgold really enjoyed to be on her rooftop with her family, and we heard that story. So I want you to think about what is something you like to do with your family, and I want you to draw a picture of it. And then around that picture, around the border, I want you to think of different shapes that you can put around and designs, and then you'll have the story in the inside, just as Faith Ringgold did. I want you to actually also share that story with someone. Remember, you are telling a story through your drawings. I can't wait to see what you create. Don't forget when you're done to fill out the Google form so that you can receive credit. And also, if you'd like to share it with me, head over to Flipgrid, or you can always email me as well. I love to see what you create. Okay, friends, until next time, stay creative.